Well, hello there. How is everyone? I hope you're all well on this fabulous Monday. You're looking amazing, by the way. And this is video 1 of 2. You know the drill. But anyway, we're going to get straight into the meat and potatoes because I'm aware it's Monday and people aren't quite into the momentum of things on a Monday morning. So let's get straight into it. There's been a lot of videos floating about and a lot of you guys have reached out and sent me links to the likes of True Crime Design, talking about the inconsistencies from the coroner, etc., etc. And look, it's all very interesting stuff, and I would certainly say that even though I don't agree with every single thing that some of these channels say, it's certainly worth listening to some of these videos to go back to the start and look at things that have been said and how that information has altered and been adjusted over time. But what was my takeaway from everything? My main takeaway was this. Look, the Idaho 4 crime itself, what actually happened at 1122 King Road, it wasn't a silent movie. This wasn't something that was done in the dead of night with absolutely no sound. And that's incredibly important. Because even though we don't want to point the finger and say, look, this person knew or that person knew, that person heard something, that person's story's not right, and I talk about the likes of Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk, especially Dylan Mortensen. And look, this ain't about hating on Dylan Mortensen. This is just about trying to understand, trying to look at what we've been given as stories. And we know that her story in particular has changed. It's gone from hearing noises and even shouting up to tell people to be quiet, and to them being changed to frozen in shock phase. And you know, this is what's thrown the confusion. This is what's really put a spanner in the works. But then you hear about the specifics on the crime itself and where these victims were found. You know, Kaylee and Maddie found on the same bed, and it makes you think, so is this where they were? Is it in a house that had all this many rooms free? We have a situation where the dog is shut in one room, Murphy, and then we have these two girls apparently sharing or seemingly sharing and sleeping in one bed. I don't know. I just don't know how that works out, because I think to myself, right, so if that was the case, because if these were all sort of slain while they slept, it kind of makes sense that there would have been no noise. Quick, done and dusted. But it wouldn't lead you to believe that if you listen to how these things played out in terms of where they were found, like where the knife sheath was found underneath Maddie, I believe it was, and how one was laying across the other, almost like a friend had came to the defence of her friend. Now, are we meant to believe that this was all done in complete and utter silence? We head downstairs to a scenario that I've always said seemed more likely that Ethan and Xana were roused themselves by the noise above them. And I questioned as to whether Ethan had perhaps come out to see what the noise was and had indeed been, or the start of his attack had happened outside the room, and then the perpetrator then commenced into the room, and that is when the altercation with Xana then happened. The defensive wounds I mentioned, and I'm trying to keep this as YouTube friendly as possible. We know how horrendous this was, but I think as we talk about it, it's very, very clear to understand the aforementioned statement of this not being a silent movie. I believe that this was an horrific attack, that perhaps the perpetrator was caught unawares of how this was going down. Did they think that they were going to be able to enter into this property because of the time with which they chose, and that they would meet with minimal resistance because they expected them to be asleep. I'd like to know how they knew, and I've said this before, how they knew who was in the house, when they were in the house, so on and so forth, and how they managed to know that they could enter this house relatively easily. They must have been here before, surely. But yeah, I just feel that this was not a silent movie. And is it important? Is it, at the end of the day, are we just going over and talking about the horrendous details of this for our own curiosity? You know, the dark curiosities that we have. But there is more to it. For me, it's trying to understand whether the other people in that room, in that house, on them floors, they did hear what was going on. And if they did indeed hear the brutal attacks that their roommates were going through, then again it takes us full circle back round to the delays with which we saw in calling 911. And I see comments still talking about this and trying to make that make sense, saying that the two surviving roommates had just been asleep, and it was when Hunter came over that he actually found them and he raised the alarm. But then that doesn't go hand in hand with the stories that came out about the 911 call and the fact that it was stated that someone had been noted as being unconscious. And you think, well, that doesn't make sense, because I don't think you could have walked into that scenario and felt that someone was unconscious. But let me know down below, when you start hearing all of these things where we're going back to the start and reading what the coroner is having to say, and when they're describing the injuries and the defensive wounds, and we know that these poor victims were not asleep, this wasn't something that was done while they slept. Is something amiss? Has this all been about controlling what people know and what they don't know? We've seen so much of the information gagged, and perhaps it's just being gagged because it's just too horrendous. Like them not allowing some of the emergency responders to enter the property because it was so horrendous, even though they were new to the job, and it was something that they would have to get used to eventually. You know, we see road traffic accidents that can be just as horrendous. But yeah, there's a lot happening around the Idaho 4 case still, and there's a lot of questions that still go on unanswered even today. But let me know down below what you think. Have you been watching these videos, and what are your thoughts? And I'll catch you all in video 2 later today.